The chain had been there since morning. It ran from an iron ring sunk into the canyon wall. Old iron, rusted the color of dried blood, and it ended at Dessa's wrist. Not wrapped, locked. A padlock the size of a man's fist, the kind that didn't negotiate. She had pulled at it until her skin went raw, and the copper thread in her warm brown hair was plastered flat against her neck with sweat. She had screamed once, in the first hour, when she still believed someone might hear. The canyon had thrown the sound back at her, emptied of everything except echo. No one heard. The sun sat overhead like a hot coal pressed to the top of the world. The canyon walls rose on either side, sandstone and shadow, ochre and rust, indifferent. A ribbon of sky ran between the ridgelines. It was the brightest blue Dessa had ever hated. She sat on the floor of the canyon, her rust-colored skirt spread in the dust, her white cotton blouse soaked through at the back. Both garments were too large on her slight frame, borrowed off a rancher's line 2 months ago when she had nothing else. She had planned to replace them. She had planned a great many things. Harker Doyle had taken most of her plans with him when he rode out at dawn. She had trusted him. That was the part she could not forgive herself for. She had trusted his town suit and his reasonable voice and his cold, pale blue eyes that had watched her with what she'd mistaken for concern. He had found her at the depot in Sulphur Creek with nothing but a carpet bag and the remains of a season's wages. And he had offered her work. Real work, he said. Housekeeper for a ranch up along the Redwool Breaks. Good pay, a clean room, a future. She had been hungry enough and tired enough to believe him. She was good at believing things when she needed to. What he had actually offered her was a transaction. He had sold her, or something close enough to it. She understood that now, with the iron ring in the canyon wall, and the sun moving across the sky, and nobody in the world who knew where she was. She was 24 years old. She had storm-gray eyes and high cheekbones and a quiet mouth, and she had survived worse than most women she'd known, and she was not going to die here. She worked at the lock again. Her fingers had bled and dried and bled again. The iron ring was solid as the earth itself, sunk deep into the rock face, and no amount of pulling or twisting gave it even a millimeter of persuasion. She tried. She kept trying. She had always been small-framed, but the years of physical work, laundry, harvest labor, kitchen work in 3 different towns, had left her wiry rather than frail, and she used every bit of that wire now against the chain. The chain didn't care. She stopped and pressed her back against the canyon wall and closed her eyes and breathed. Slow. Even. Her father had taught her that when she was young, before the fever took him, "Count your breaths," he'd said. "When everything else is gone, you still have your lungs." She counted to 10. She counted to 20. The sun moved another inch. That was when she heard the horse. Not close. Not yet. A sound carried down through the canyon like water, hooves on dry ground, deliberate, not hurried. She opened her storm-grey eyes and pressed herself flat against the wall, which was reflex and also useless, because there was nowhere to go. She had 12 feet of chain and a ring in the rock, and that was the full extent of her world. She waited. The sound grew. She tracked it to a bend in the canyon trail above her, where the wall curved and blocked the sight line. For a long moment, there was only the beat of hooves and the dry wind moving through the gap overhead. Then horse and rider came around the bend, and she saw him. He was broad-shouldered and unhurried, the way a man looks when the country hasn't broken him yet, or has broken him so thoroughly that the parts set back together harder. Iron-grey hair beneath a pushed-back hat, a trail duster over a faded blue shirt, pale grey eyes that swept the canyon floor in a single calm pass before they landed on her. He stopped his horse. He looked at her, at the chain, at the ring, at her raw wrist, at her face, and his expression did not change in any dramatic way. No shock, no horror, just a settling, like a man adjusting his weight before he picks something up. "How long?" he said. Not a greeting, not an introduction, just those two words, flat and direct. Dessa did not know whether to feel relief or greater fear. She had been raised on enough hard lessons to know that one man's rescue was another man's alternative arrangement. "Since sunrise," she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. He dismounted without fanfare, looped his reins over a jutted spur of rock, and walked toward her. He had a way of moving that was economical. No wasted steps, no performance. His hands were large and calloused, the kind that had worked rope and iron and weather for a long time. He crouched in front of the padlock and examined it. "You got a name?" he said, not looking up. "Dessa." "Cord." He reached into his duster and produced a short pry tool, the kind a man carries when he's spent time around things that trap other things. He studied the lock. "Somebody wanted you to stay put. They wanted a good deal more than that." He glanced up at that. His pale grey eyes met hers for a moment, and something in them shifted. Not pity, she decided, more like recognition, like a man who has heard a version of this story before and has a specific feeling about it. "Name of the man who left you here," he said. It was not a question. She told him anyway. "Harker Doyle. He operates out of Sulphur Creek. Wears a town suit like it's armor." Cord's jaw tightened. "Not much. A fraction." He went back to the lock. "I know the name," he said. He worked at the lock for several minutes. It was old, but it was solid, and when the pry tool alone didn't serve, he retrieved a different tool from his saddlebag. She couldn't see exactly what, and used it in conjunction with the first. He was methodical. He didn't rush. The canyon was quiet except for the wind and the faint percussion of iron against iron. The lock opened. The chain went slack. Dessa caught herself with her other hand against the wall. Her freed wrist throbbed deep and steady, and she pressed it to her chest without thinking, cradling it like something fragile, which irritated her because she was not fragile, only injured. "Can you ride?" Cord asked. "Yes." "Stand up first. Make sure." She stood. Her legs held. She had been sitting in the heat for too many hours, and the standing cost her a moment of white behind the eyes, but she breathed through it, and her legs held. "I can ride," she said. He didn't argue with her. He brought his horse over, a dark roan, deep-chested, calm, and held it steady while she mounted. Then he swung up behind her, which she did not love, but did not protest, because she had no horse of her own, and no option other than the canyon floor, and neither of those served her. They rode out. The sun was beginning to tip west by the time they cleared the canyon mouth and came out onto open ground. The land spread before them in the particular way of high desert country, wide and pitiless and magnificent, copper and sage green, and the occasional dark line of a creek bed. The sky was enormous. After the enclosed rock walls, it felt like being set free of something larger than the chain. Cord did not speak much, and Dessa did not fill the silence. She had learned the value of silence the way most women on the frontier learned it, slowly, at cost. After perhaps 2 miles, he said, "There's a ranch about 4 miles northeast, the Corbin place. Woman there is decent. She'll see to your wrist and give you a place to sleep that isn't a canyon floor. And then that's up to you." She considered this. The honest plainness of it. He had not said, "I'll take care of you," or "You're safe now," or any of the other things men said when they wanted something in return. He had said, "That's up to you," which was either honest or calculated, and she had learned to take the honest interpretation first and revise later. "Who are you?" she asked. A pause. Not evasive. More like a man choosing the shortest, accurate answer. "I track people," he said. "Mostly men who take things that don't belong to them." Dessa thought about Harker Doyle. She thought about the depot in Sulphur Creek, and the reasonable voice, and the cold, pale blue eyes. She thought about the iron ring and the padlock, and the way a man could make captivity sound like opportunity if he spoke slowly enough. "Were you looking for him?" she asked. "Doyle. I was looking for a woman named Claire Holt, 19 years old. Went missing from Redwall 3 weeks ago." He paused. "She wasn't in the canyon." The name landed quietly and lay there between them. "There were others," Dessa said. It was not a question either. "There were others," he confirmed. They rode in silence for a while after that. The Corbin Ranch announced itself first as a smudge of chimney smoke, and then as a low cluster of buildings set against a rise of red stone. It was a modest operation, a main house, a barn, 2 outbuildings, but it was solid, the kind of solid that comes from years of maintenance rather than original wealth. The garden beside the house was real and working, not ornamental. Someone here valued the persistence of growing things. A woman came out of the house when she heard the horse. She was somewhere past 50, built like someone who had carried a great deal of weight over a long time and still stood straight. She had flour on her hands, and she wiped them on her apron and looked at Dessa with the direct, immediate assessment of a woman who had taken in strays of all kinds and could read the nature of the trouble before anyone spoke. "Off the horse and inside," the woman said. "Both of you. I've got coffee." Her name was Marta Corbin. Her husband had died 3 years prior of a lung fever, and she had kept the ranch running with the help of 2 hands, who were both honest, and one who was partially honest, but useful for heavy lifting. She cleaned Dessa's wrist without fuss, wrapping it in clean linen with the practiced economy of someone who had dealt with a great deal worse. She fed them both without asking questions, because she had lived long enough to know that the questions could wait, and food could not. Later, when Cord was outside seeing to the horse, Marta sat across the kitchen table from Dessa and folded her flour-dusted hands and looked at her. "Where are you from originally?" Marta asked. "East of here. A long way east. It doesn't exist for me anymore." Marta nodded as though this were a completely ordinary thing to say, which in the territory it largely was. "What do you know how to do?" Dessa told her. She knew laundry, cooking, kitchen work, basic carpentry, how to tend a kitchen garden, how to drive a wagon. She knew how to read and write because her father had valued it before the fever took him, and she had valued it after. Marta nodded again. "I'm short-handed. One of my good hands left last month for California." She said it with the particular neutrality of someone who has chosen not to be bitter about it. "I can pay you fair, nothing spectacular, and the room is small." Dessa looked at the clean kitchen, the real fire, the woman across from her with her honest eyes. "I'll stay," she said. Cord left the next morning. He stood in the yard in the early light, the iron grey of his hair catching the first pale sun, and he told her he was riding north toward the Redwall breaks to keep looking for Claire Holt. He said it plainly, without performance, and Dessa stood on the porch with her bandaged wrist and watched him with storm-grey eyes and said nothing for a moment. "Be careful," she said finally. He looked at her. The pale grey eyes settled on her face and stayed there. "I will be," he said, and then, "I'll be back through this way inside of 2 weeks." She didn't ask why. She told herself it was because she didn't need to ask, because she already understood the practical reason. The Corbin Ranch was on the trail north and back. It was a logical waypoint. It had nothing to do with her specifically. She told herself this twice, which meant she didn't believe it. He rode out into the morning dust, and she watched until the trail duster disappeared into the sage. The 2 weeks that followed were good in the quiet, measurable way that good things often are after a period of danger. Dessa worked. She rose before the sun, made the fires, helped Marta in the kitchen, carried water, tended the garden, repaired 2 sections of fence, with a competence that surprised one of the hands, and did not surprise Marta at all. Her wrist healed. The rawness faded to tenderness, and then to a faint silver scar that she did not mind. Scars were a kind of record. She had always preferred having a record. She slept in the small room off the back of the house, with a window that faced east and a wool blanket and a candle she allowed herself for an hour each night. She lay in the dark in the remaining hour and thought, as she often did in the dark, about the things that had brought her here: the depot, the carpetbag, the reasonable voice, the chain. She thought about Claire Holt, 19 years old and missing. On the fourth day, she asked Marta what she knew about Harker Doyle. Marta set down the pot she was holding and turned around slowly. "Enough," she said. "Tell me," Marta told her. Doyle operated a kind of shadow commerce along the territorial routes. Not always what people assumed when they heard about men like him, but something adjacent and equally predatory. He found women in transit, women between situations, women who had just enough desperation to make them available and just enough isolation to make them invisible. He routed them to various operations, some logging camps, some mining concerns, some private households in the far territories, and he charged a finder's fee to the men who wanted reliable, uncomplaining labor, and he paid nothing to the women themselves because the transaction didn't include them as a party to it. It included them as the subject of it. He had been operating this way for at least 4 years. Nobody had arrested him because the men who used his service were, on the whole, men with some standing in the territory, and standing was a kind of immunity in a place where the law was thin and the distances were vast. Dessa listened to all of this, with her hands flat on the table. "Cord knows," she said. "Cord's been tracking the edges of it for better than a year," Marta said. "He found 2 women last spring, brought them out of a logging camp up past the breaks. He can't touch Doyle legally. No marshal will take the case without more evidence. So he tracks where Doyle sends people and tries to find them before the situation hardens." "Claire Holt?" "Yes." Dessa sat with this for a long time. On the 6th day, Harker Doyle came to the ranch. She didn't see him arrive. She was in the kitchen garden when she heard the horse, and she came around the corner of the house with a handful of late carrots and saw the town suit first, dark fabric pressed, out of place the way expensive things always are on working land, and then the slick dark hair and the cold, pale blue eyes and the politician's smile. He saw her at the same moment. For an instant, neither of them moved. The morning air sat between them, still and dry as chalk. Then Doyle's smile shifted, contracted at the corners, recalibrated, and he said, in the reasonable voice, "Miss Dessa, I'm relieved to find you well. There was a terrible misunderstanding the other day." "There was a padlock," she said. "A misunderstanding about the arrangements," he said, as if she had agreed with him. "I owe you an apology and the wages I promised. That's why I've come." He reached into his jacket and produced a fold of paper currency, held it out with the patient ease of a man who has learned that money settles most conversations. She did not move toward it. Marta appeared in the doorway of the house. She said nothing. She was carrying a long-handled iron skillet with the matter-of-fact readiness of someone who had used it for other things before cooking. Doyle glanced at Marta and then back at Dessa. His cold, pale blue eyes did a rapid calculation. "I also need to speak with you privately," he said, "about the arrangements going forward. I think we could come to a more agreeable understanding." "There's no private conversation to have," Dessa said. "Go." His smile did not leave his face, but it went flat in a way that changed the temperature of the yard. "You've been speaking with someone," he said. "That man Cord. He tells a version of things that is not particularly accurate. He has a grievance with me that is personal in nature, and it colors his account. I hope you haven't made decisions based on—" "Go," Dessa said again. He looked at her for a long moment, at her storm-grey eyes, and her high cheekbones, and her quiet mouth, and her bandaged wrist, and the carrots in her hand. He was trying to find the leverage point. She could see him looking for it. She had seen that look before, in the canyon, at the depot, in every situation where a man with options studied a woman to find the one thing she needed badly enough to be useful. There was nothing there. She had nothing he could use. He tucked the money back into his jacket. "This isn't resolved," he said. It wasn't a threat exactly. It was something more patient than a threat. A statement of intent. He rode out. Dessa stood in the yard for a long time after the dust settled, the carrots growing warm in her hand, and she felt the cold, clear, specific knowledge that he would be back, and that the next time would not be a conversation. She went inside and told Marta everything. Cord came back on the 12th day, not the 14th. He rode in at dusk, when the sky above the red stone rise was the color of a bruise healing, and Dessa was on the porch because she had spent the last 6 days divided between working and watching the road. She told herself she was watching for Doyle. Both things were true. He looked tired, not defeated. There was a distinction she had learned to read in men's faces, the way a woman learns to read the specific quality of a man's stillness, but used up in the honest way of hard physical effort without sufficient return. His trail duster was dusty to the shoulder. He dismounted and tied his horse and came up to the porch and looked at her. "Claire Holt?" Dessa asked. "Alive, logging camp above the red wall breaks, like I thought. I got her out. She's at a church mission in Haverfield now." He paused. "She's in a bad way, but she's alive, and she's somewhere decent." Dessa let out a breath she had been holding, it felt like, for 12 days. "Doyle came here," she said. Cord went very still, the kind of still that is not calm, but rather the moment before motion. "When?" "6 days ago. He wanted to talk. I told him to go. He went." She looked at Cord steadily. "He'll come back. We both know it." Cord sat down on the porch steps. He rested his forearms on his knees and stared at the ground for a moment. In the darkening light, his iron-grey hair looked silver, and the weathered lines of his face were very clear, and his hands, with all their long labour, lay still between his knees. "There's a marshal in Creed who will take the case now," he said, "with Claire Holt's account, with what happened to you, with the other 2 women from the spring. That's 4 documented accounts and a witness trail back to Sulphur Creek." He looked up at her. "I need you to be willing to tell it." "I'll tell it," she said, without hesitation, without qualification. He looked at her for a moment. "I know you will," he said. They rode to Creed together, Dessa and Cord and Marta, who came because she had a number of things to say to the marshal in Creed about Harker Doyle and the territory's selective enforcement of its own statutes, and who said them in a voice that left very little room for equivocation. The marshal in Creed was a lean, sun-worn man named Pollard, who had been waiting for this particular case to become prosecutable for longer than he'd wanted to admit. He listened to all of it. He wrote all of it down. He sent 2 deputies towards Sulphur Creek the following morning with a warrant and the reasonable expectation of finding Harker Doyle before Doyle heard the news and ran. He didn't run in time. They brought him in 2 days later, and when they did, he was wearing his town suit and his politician's smile, and both of them looked considerably less impressive in the context of iron bars and a formal charge and 4 women's accounts laid out in black ink on good paper. The cold, pale blue eyes moved through a series of calculations and found that none of them added up to a way out. The smile went away. Dessa was not in Creed when they brought him in. She was back at the Corbin Ranch, in the kitchen garden, with the morning sun on her sun-dark skin and her freckled forearms and her warm brown hair with its copper thread coming loose from its knot. She was planting a second row of something she and Marta had decided would come in useful in spring. The soil was dry but workable, and her hands knew what to do with it, and the sky above the red stone rise was the kind of blue she had decided she could like again. Cord found her there. He stood at the edge of the garden in his trail duster, hat in hand for once, and told her about Doyle. She listened with her hands in the soil and her storm-grey eyes on his face. "It's done," he said. "And Claire Holt?" "Still at the mission. They think she'll be able to travel by spring." He paused. "I told the mission I'd check in on her way back from Creed, see that she has what she needs." He turned his hat in his hands. "There were others I didn't find in time. That's the part that doesn't leave." She understood that. She understood the specific weight of what you carry for the ones you didn't reach. She had carried her own version of it since her father died, and she had not been home in time to say goodbye. "You found me," she said. He looked at her. His pale grey eyes were steady and honest, and not particularly comfortable with being thanked, which she found she respected. "I was in the canyon," he said. "I was going to be in the canyon regardless. And yet—" He was quiet for a moment. The morning was warm. A meadowlark called from somewhere along the fence line, one of the pure sounds, rare and unasked for. The garden soil was dark where she'd worked it. "Marta tells me you're staying on through winter," Cord said. "She needs the help, and I need—" She paused. Let the sentence sit. "I need somewhere that's the same when I wake up as it was when I went to sleep." He nodded. She could see him understanding that in the way he understood things, quietly, completely, without making a thing of it. "I'll be back through here in the spring," he said. "I've got a line on 2 more cases north of the breaks. It'll take me the winter to work through them." "Come back careful," she said. "I come back careful every time." She looked at him, at his iron-grey hair and his broad, unhurried shoulders, and his calloused hands turning the hat slowly in a way she thought he wasn't aware of. And she thought, "I do not know this man." She thought it clearly and honestly. And she thought also, "But I know the shape of him. I know what he does when the lock won't open, and what he does when it does. I know he doesn't flinch, and I know he doesn't claim credit. And I know that when he says he'll come back, he will come back. On the frontier, that was a great deal of knowing." "Spring, then," she said. He put his hat back on. He looked at her once more, the look of a man who is memorizing something he does not want to lose. And then he turned and walked back toward the barn, where his roan horse was resting, and the trail north waited in its unhurried way. Dessa turned back to the garden. She put her hands in the soil and kept working. The sky above the redstone rise was that particular blue, and the meadowlark was still calling, and the morning was warm and real and entirely, abundantly hers. She planted the 2nd row. She planted the 3rd.